I'm Nasreen Abdelmajid, a producer on AMI Today. Coming up, we have a lovely guest joining us very soon. Danielle Bouthillier is a laboratory technician, digital artist, and a science fiction writer. Her debut novel, Hero, is now available on audiobook format, and the plot features a deaf superhero. This science fiction, drama, and action novel with a hint of romance is an unconventional and unique superhero story. So here's a brief, short synopsis I'd like to go through. On a dark night, the son of a supervillain, Johnny, is saved by a mysterious stranger. Years later, Johnny stumbles upon Hero living in the streets and wallowing in self-pity. He invites the superhero into his office, where she tells him her life story, which is filled with abuse, poverty, and anxiety. While telling her life story, she reveals to him her real identity, the identity of her friends and family, and her weaknesses. Hero's role as a superhero is to save other people's lives in moments of danger and stress. But as a matter of fact, she's the one who needs real protection and support. And the author of this compelling novel, Danielle Bouthillier, is here to tell us more about it very shortly. But first, what are you looking forward to in this conversation, Jacob?
You know, when you're talking to an author, chances are they've written quite a few books, but this is her debut novel, which is an experience that I think a lot of people think about trying. It's almost like a cliche that you hear people telling, oh yeah, I'm working on a novel, but then they never actually end up finishing it. She did. And I want to know the work that went into it and what surprises come with writing a debut novel. The other thing I'm really interested in talking about is disability representation, because the hero in this book is hard of hearing and uses a hearing aid, and it's a pretty central part of the story. This is something that we talk about on AMI, not just on this show, but a number of different shows, the importance of disability representation. I personally think it's one of the most important things in changing the perception and disputing misconceptions about disability. Because good, accurate representation is often the best way to make people understand how people with disabilities really live, what we really are like. Because chances are that, at least speaking for blind people, like most people haven't met a blind person. And if they have, they probably just saw them caning around across the street. That doesn't really count as knowing them. And so the only reason that people make bad assumptions about blind people is because of bad representation in movies and TV shows.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I feel like there's a lack of, first of all, lack of representation of the disability community and accurate representations in the disability community. So when I hear stories about these kind of things and hearing about Danielle Bouthillier's novel is amazing. Honestly, I feel like that's what we need. And for people to get an idea, great perception of what this is all about. So I think we do have an audio sample just to get a little taste of what this book is about.
There was a railroad crossing 10 feet away in a track that looked like it traveled into the darkness. The railway's crossing sign, barrier gate, and lights looked old, and Hero wondered if it worked. She then walked over the tracks and continued walking on this deserted road. Johnny was now in a panic. At this point, he was afraid of bleeding to death rather than being run over by a train. Just then, he heard the most terrifying noise. He froze and looked in the direction of the sound. The barrier lowered, the lights began to flash, and an alarm started to chime. A train was coming. Hero, who had been walking across the tracks, turned around to see the display, and then stood there waiting to see if a train would come. Then she heard a scream. Someone was in trouble. She had the ability to save whoever was in trouble. The only problem was that saving people had gotten her into trouble before. Should I do it? No, I'm in enough trouble already, she thought. Then she turned and started to walk along the old road. Oh, please, God, I don't want to die. Hearing this cry, Hero stopped and reflected on the situation. Then she turned back and looked at the activated railway crossing display. All right, just one more time.
That was a sample from Hero by Danielle Bouthillier, narrated by David York. That is a buttery smooth voice if I've ever heard one. Niz, what were your thoughts on that sample really quickly?
Absolutely. I loved that sample. And disclaimer, this was a 5-minute cut down to 1:53, and I hated that. I wanted to play the full 5 minutes. So we're here and we're joined by Danielle Bouthillier just to give us more about that, because I want to hear from her about her novel. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all set to get started with today's interview. Let's just get right into it. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review, and I'm your host, Jacob Szymanski. Writing your debut novel is a daunting task. Honestly, seeing any important personal project to completion is difficult when you're working a full-time job. That didn't stop Danielle Bouthillier from writing her debut novel, Hero. Welcome to the show, Danielle.
Well, thank you for having me.
We're so glad to have you with us. Tell us about your book. Like, what do we need to know? What do you tell people when people ask you, what's your book about?
I tell them the plot line is about a washed-up superhero who tells their life story to the son of a supervillain.
And what is it that inspired you to write a superhero story of all things?
Well, growing up, I liked the superhero genre and I liked reading, but it was hard to find something that was non-comic book. I could find novels, but they're all based off screenplays from movies. Oh, sorry about that. And I wish there was more young adult superhero fiction genre. And interestingly, now that I'm doing the marketing personnel also made a comment that it's a rare genre, but it's in high demand. So that's probably why I chose this genre, that I liked superheroes and wish there was more young adult novels that were not based off of screenplays.
Yeah, as I was reading it, I wasn't sure. I couldn't quite put my finger on what was unique about it. I knew there was something about it, but you just pointed it out, and it's a superhero story told in a novel, which is usually that's in a comic book or in a movie. Really cool, medium. I'm curious about what personal experiences of yours and your background. How did those two aspects affect your inspiration for this book? What is it about your personal interests and life experiences that affected this book?
Well, for personal interests and life experiences, sorry. I wrote down a quote here by Virginia Woolf: writing is a window into the office soul, life experiences, fears, and dreams. So there is a lot of, I don't want to give too much away, but there is a lot of experiences. There's some quotes in there that I have said in real life. And the inspiration would be probably a long time ago, I had a family member who accused Superman of being evil. And I thought, well, this is interesting. This is interesting. I wonder if she met Superman in real life, would she actually say those mean things to him? And initially the story was about a male superhero. It was very stereotypic. or a lot of stereotypes in it, but during the revisions over the years, it became this, and it became unique.
What did your family members say exactly about Superman? What was their argument? I'm curious.
It was watching a cartoon late at night, and it was the Adventures of Superman. I believe it was from the 60s. And she asked if he was possessed by Satan. And I tried to go roundabout answer that, he's an alien from a planet who comes here and he saves people. And it's funny because some people would see him maybe as a divine being or an angel, but she just saw the complete opposite, which gave inspiration to one of the twist villains in the story.
Right, and the mother of Hero, your main character in this story, accuses Hero, because Hero has superpowers, that she's possessed, and the one thing that will make her better is the Lord. So there seems to be like a direct correlation between that and your story of your family members saying that Superman was possessed.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. So Hero is hard of hearing. How did you come to write a character that was hard of hearing? Like, where did that aspect come from?
Part of the writing process, well, besides having a plot and a storyline and a timeline, next part is to take all the characters and you build them up. Luckily, there's a lot of worksheets I can find online, and you can say what your character looks like, what's their weaknesses, what's their favorite type of music. And originally, the character was going to be mute and use sign language. Then I wanted her to play a musical instrument, because not a lot of superheroes have hobbies, I find. So originally, it was going to be a flute and then a fiddle. And then I really liked the guitar, so changed the guitar. And while doing research, I learned that people who generally either they're blind or they're hard of hearing, they're such excellent musicians on any musical instrument. And I actually wanted to put that in for my character. Originally, in the original version, she has a cochlear implant, but to make it more easier to read, I would say a hearing aid. But that's what makes her such a good musician, is the hard of hearing. I actually saw it was a program where there was an artist who had 20% vision, and the artworks were astounding. So there's no limitations. Even though my character, she's hard of hearing, she can still have the ability to play music.
In writing a character who's hard of hearing, did you feel any pressure to do it right, well researched, respectful, and good representation?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure, no problem. I was wondering if in writing a character who's hard of hearing, did you feel pressure and the need to give accurate representation and do research to make a character that was fully fledged?
I don't think I felt any pressure at all, no.
Usually, if I were to ask authors, they're very uncomfortable with writing characters with disabilities. I go on online forums, and I'm fairly active on a disability forums, especially the ones for visual impairment. And what you'll see all the time, it's almost a cliche now, is authors making posts on a blindness forum, for example, and saying something along the lines of, "Hey, I'm writing a book, and I want to write a blind character, but I want to make sure it's respectful." And then they talk about the plot, and then they just have a bunch of people nitpick a little bit. And I'm kind of glad to hear you say that you weren't too nervous about it, because I don't like that we as a community sometimes make people feel uncomfortable. And I will say that your representation of people who are hard of hearing in Hero is very respectful and well done, and just good representation overall.
Well, I could sort of add to that. I work in the medical field and volunteered at the hospital beforehand,
Right.
and I've I come across people of all shapes and sizes, and blind or hard of hearing, and no, I'm pretty comfortable working with these people or being around these people. So
Yeah,
no, I felt
so
no pressure being accurate.
you do so you do work full time, which is I mentioned this in the intro. Like how did you find time for that? Because writing, especially, this is a decently long book. It's about an 8-hour audiobook. Where did you find the time? Like how did you actually sit down and complete this thing?
Well, it actually started about 10 years ago.
Oh, okay, so it took a long time.
So I was in university at the time, learning pre-medical sciences, which was about 12-hour days. You would have classes in the morning and then lab at night. Luckily enough, I generally had Fridays off. I would do a little bit at a time, just spend 5 minutes, 30 minutes, or even an hour a day writing a few pages or revising notes. There was a commercial I saw one time. I can't remember what it was for, but you see a desk and a person's life sort of goes real fast, and you see like the children growing up, and then he's finally able to retire and write a book. And I said, well, that's silly, because he could have taken 5 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day, or even like just designated an hour a week to work on the project. And over time, it really builds up. For me, my first draft, it probably took 2 years, and then it took like another 2 years to do the revisions. And then after those 4
Wow.
years, I got a lot of feedback, so I can go back and do more revisions. But back then, I would just spend a little time each day to work on it, and then that's how it ended up real large. It was actually longer. It's 75,000 words. It used to be over 100,000 words, so I was able to scale it back with revisions.
You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review on AMI Audio. I'm your host, Jacob Szymanski, and I'm talking to Danielle Bouthillier, who just published her debut novel, Hero. I want to talk about that revision process. Like, did you work with an editor, or did you do that yourself?
I'm gonna say in the earlier stages, it was more like online forums. You would post sections and ask, what do you think? And you would get feedback. Some of the feedback was helpful, some of it was not helpful. Now, more recently, over the last 4 years, with the publication company, they have an actual editor at their company. So working with them also helped. But yes, I'm more of a science major and not an English major, so I definitely need help with revisions and getting feedback and getting constructive criticism and making the changes required if needed.
How do you handle it when an editor or somebody in a forum tells you to get rid of something, or get rid of thousands of words at a time, see your work get criticized like that? Because that's what editorializing is, right?
Oh, yeah. I'll give you a good example. The original story had about 5 villains. So one of the feedback I got, which was good, was you have 2 strong villains, get rid of the rest of them. Just focus on the main villain and the twist villain, and then you should be fine. But then I realized I had to remove a lot of scenes. There's remnants in the story. You can tell something might have been there at once, but that was sort of not hurtful or painful. But later on, I would agree. I said, yes, that was a good choice that the editor made, or the constructive criticism noted. And then I was able to make those revisions.
When people are giving you feedback, what's the difference between good constructive feedback and unproductive, unhelpful feedback?
I find the helpful feedback, they actually give you some notes like, I like this character, but I didn't like this character. I've had a handful of people who actually didn't like the novel, but then I asked why, and then they can't give you an explanation.
Yeah, that's not
So
helpful
that's
at all.
probably not. So that's probably, it's like, okay, there's nothing you can grab onto to say that, you know, you hated this character or you hated this scene. So that's not very helpful if you can't pinpoint what needs to be fixed, or suggestions like, I like this character, but maybe add this onto it.
So what did you find most challenging as a debut novelist?
Well, the first one was the revisions, because I prefer the original story, of course.
Really?
But it had too many fluff scenes, too many characters, too many villains. But I'm pretty satisfied with what came out and what came out in the editing process. I find recently marketing's pretty challenging nowadays, because it's just the scheduling conflicts, and I'm sort of camera shy and everyone wants to do interviews, so I find these interviews a bit difficult.
Yeah, that's the one part that when you're an author, a published author, you don't really sign up for this. Like, you're expecting to sit in your chair late at night with a coffee and typing out your manuscript, but you end up having to do these interviews, and trust me, I'm trying to make it as easy as possible. I know it's stressful. But this audiobook that we played a sample from earlier, from your book, did you think about the audiobook as you were writing the book or editing, come across sections that you thought maybe, oh, this is going to sound good as an audiobook?
I would say initially no, when I was initially creating the novel, but it was suggested recently, because audiobooks are becoming more and more popular. It was suggested, hey, would you like to make this into an audiobook? And I was like, wow, that would be nice. And well, I then I had some ideas. I was like, well, I would like to have a male voice, because majority of the characters are male, and I honestly, I prefer male voice actors with audiobooks. Some people might like female voices. I preferred the male. There's more male characters. And then going through the book, I was able to tick off where I could put in some sound effects. So those are added in. And because I recently, well, not recently, but there was an audiobook where it did have some music and sound effects. And I said, this sounds great. I want to put this in my audiobook. So it was added in, and it sounds pretty good.
What was it like to hear the audiobook once it was fully recorded and polished? That must have been a cool experience for you.
To tell you the truth, I was probably half asleep on the bus. I would have to replay it a few times. I really like the voice actor, that's David York, and I thanked him multiple times. It's just a great voice actor. Maybe that's why it was putting me to sleep. I'm not too sure, or I already know the story, so I was sort of bored with it.
Well, are you an audiobook listener at all?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Are you an audiobook listener?
Recently, yes. Because I had to find a few examples to see what I like and what I didn't like. And then, of course, make notes as well. Like I said, I heard an audiobook with sound effects. I liked it, so then that's what I requested in mine.
See, with people who don't regularly listen to audiobooks, you often hear that they fall asleep. Because it's a very different thing than reading it. I'll always say it's kind of a skill to develop, to be able to actively listen to an audiobook. It's kind of challenging. The other thing is that it's not for everyone too. But in making an audiobook for for Hero, you're opening it up for so many more people, and I'm really glad that you got it done as an audiobook, because for myself, selfishly, I wouldn't have been able to access it if there was no audiobook for it. So for that, thank you so much. And David York did a great job with the narration. What was ultimately the reason you decided to write this book? Like, I thought I would ask you this first, but this is an important question. Like, why did you write this book?
It was one of my life goals to write a novel. You might encounter people or family members, and they said, "What would you like to do in life?" And one of them might say, "I would like to publish a book." I've actually known a few people in my lifetime who said, "Oh, I would love to write a book," but they never sat down and write one, let alone published it. So I wanted to be like the first in my family to do so. Another incident I could think of was in grade 6. I wrote a short story, and the prize was it would be published in a book. And Lord and behold, mine was actually selected and published.
Cool.
And after that, I said, "Oh, I would like to do a novel someday." It was just finding the inspiration to write it. Once I had the inspiration, then it became a little more easier.
I want to thank you so much for making time for us today. Is there anything you want to let the audience know to prompt them to pick up your book or listen to your book?
Well, what I've been telling my coworkers is if you love the superhero genre and you like drama, most likely you're going to like this story. And I had a note here somewhere. One second. It was and then recently they want the audiobook, so I say like with the audiobook, like please like sit down and actually actively listen to it, like you might have mentioned earlier, because
Yeah.
I've tried to listen to it, and like if you find yourself a nice almost like a reading spot, but you need like a listening spot to enjoy this
Yeah.
book.
You got to be cozy
yeah,
with a coffee.
Yeah, cup of coffee or cup of tea, just like with a regular book. Yes, the biggest one is if you like superheroes, you like action, you like drama, you most likely will like this book as well. It'll be a new favorite.
Danielle, thank you so much for making time, and congratulations on the debut novel.
Well, thank you for having me today.
Of course. That was Danielle Bouthillier, the author of the audiobook Hero, narrated by David York. That's all the time we have for AMI Audiobook Review. We'll be back here again tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern on AMI Audio. I'm your host, Jacob Szymanski. Thanks for listening.